What's up, everybody? Tara Wellman here, and Chicago week continues on. The last time the Cubs and the Cardinals met, the entire Midwest was still frozen, waiting for the real spring weather to finally show up. In an abbreviated two-game series, Adam Wainwright led the Cardinals to victory at frigid Wrigley Field, while Luke Weaver looked rattled for the first time this season. So pretty much just like we predicted, right? This time around, though, the Cubs make the road trip, coming to Busch for the first time this year. Now, the Cubs won 6 of the 10 games played in St. Louis last year, making this series maybe even more critical for the Cardinals in their quest to return to the postseason. Joining me today is the first return guest of the season, and hopefully technology plays along this time. From IVNV, it's Corey Finneran. So, Corey, we had so much fun last time that I figured we should give it another shot, and hopefully I can actually get the production quality right this time to match. So thanks for joining me again today.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me on.
Well, the Cubs are coming off of a 5-2 homestand, started with a 4-game sweep of the Brewers, which had to feel good, especially knowing that the Cardinals were also getting swept by the Pirates at the time over the weekend. But it's not all sunshine and lollipops for the Cubs right now. What do you take away, just sort of your top few things from this last week or so with the Cubs?
Yeah, well, I guess as a fan, I look at it and I think, hey, the offense can be absolutely unproductive, and yet the Cubs can go 5-7 on a homestand and really like scoring an average of 2 runs a game. That's a real accomplishment. And you look at offensive production like that, and that could easily be a terrible homestand and a really bad stretch of games. And so I feel like the Cubs kind of lucked out that the starting pitching, although they've been quite shaky here in the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season, in that time through the rotation, the starting pitching really stepped up. The bullpen pitched great and kind of bailed out the offense, which we've seen the offense bail out Cubs pitching quite a bit over the last few years, just because of how prolific their offense can be. And so it was really just kind of a nice change, I guess. Not that you want to see the everybody hitting under 200 in a week, but at the same time, like there were a lot of close games that could have been losses easily. And so my takeaway is, hey, we came out of that in pretty good shape. And so that's kind of my optimistic view of where the Cubs are right now. And looking ahead to this weekend, I have no idea what to expect. You just have no clue, because the Cubs team can look, as I said, the offense can bail out the pitching. The pitching can bail out the offense. They can both look great. They can both look terrible. And I guess that's just baseball. But it seems like the Cubs love to live in the extremes. And that can be tough for a fan base that is not always even-keeled.
Wait, you too? That's not just the Cardinals fan base? Oh, good
No.
to know. Good to know. Speaking of not being even keeled, Yu Darvish has been at the root of some of that roller coaster, at least in the last couple of outings, especially this last start. Fans are not particularly happy with Yu Darvish. What's going on with him? The Cardinals aren't going to see him this weekend, but it's kind of hard to talk about what happened with the Cubs this last week without going there for a minute.
Yeah, I guess just my personal view of it is, he's with a new organization. He suddenly has, this contract, which isn't huge. It's not as big as a lot of Cubs fans would make you think that it is. But it is a sizable contract. And you're surrounded by new teammates. You have new coaches, and a lot of those Cubs coaches are new. The pitching coach, Jim Hickey, is new to the Cubs this year. And so I think I think that having a little bit of a topsy-turvy start to the season isn't completely shocking, and given how he ended his postseason with the Dodgers last year. It's not completely surprising. It's not really what we want to see. And it's been really strange to watch because a lot of other Cubs pitchers, there have been extremes with the outings. It's either a lot of walks and a lot of runs, or they look lights out. We've seen that from Lester and Quintana and Chatwood. We've seen it from everybody so far, and Hendricks even. But I don't know if it's a matter of Darvish supposedly tipping his pitches like he, I guess, did in the playoffs last year. I know that the Cubs did kind of simplify his delivery. They took out that kind of extra pause leg thing that he does just to try to simplify things. Worked great in the first outing after simplifying it. Then, as we saw in his last outing, not good at all. And it's also, he's having trouble in that like fifth, sixth inning, and things just kind of fall apart. And it seems like when things start to go downhill, it really gets in his head, and he has a hard time kind of pushing through that. Contreras, his catcher, and kind of mentioned that a little bit, that he gets 2 outs and maybe just kind of like takes the edge off a little bit, and doesn't keep the pedal to the metal. I'm not real sure what it is. I think it's too early to tell yet. And I'll just say, like, my opinion is it's a 6-year contract, and I don't really want to judge him and that contract 6 starts into a 6-year contract.
That's entirely too reasonable for a baseball fan. I just want to let you know. I read that his release point is significantly lower, 3 or 4 inches on most of his pitches than it was the last 2 seasons. If you start messing with things like that, you're not always going to get immediate results, whether it's ultimately a good thing or not. I did want to ask you about the comments by Contreras, because I think that's one of those things that can get blown maybe out of proportion very quickly. So I want to give you the chance before the Cubs come into St. Louis to sort of set the record straight on how you took what Contreras said, basically saying, yeah, well, we kind of saw him let up when there were guys with 2 strikes on them.
Yeah, it's not completely surprising that Willson Contreras would maybe say something that maybe his teammates probably wouldn't appreciate him saying, or, the individual that he's talking about. But that's kind of what you get with Willson Contreras. I think that edge is what makes him such a dynamic player. And I'm assuming either there was a misunderstanding and he maybe didn't word things right. And if he did word things exactly how he wanted, I'm guessing somebody probably pulled him aside and said, "Oh, hey, probably shouldn't say that to the media and might want to word it this way." I don't necessarily think Contreras was trying to like call out you, Darvish. I don't think that's what it was. I think maybe he was just kind of identifying like, oh, this could be an issue. But, Willson Contreras is not the pitching coach. And so I think the Jim Hickey and Joe Madden probably are working with Darvish a little bit more. And Madden has talked about, some of his conversations with you, Darvish, and then Darvish also kind of talked about how much he respected that back and forth and just respected Madden as a manager. So, yeah, I suppose if it could be blown out of proportion, but I think you get young guys that in the right after a game probably say things that they maybe shouldn't say, but it is what it is.
I think there's such a fine line as far as fans are concerned, where you want a guy to give you some sort of genuine answer, right? You don't always want the cliche, here's what they always say to the media answer. But then when they do, and they give you some level of honesty, everybody's like, oh, I can't believe he said that to reporters. And that right. To me is what this is. Like, it was a guy's immediate reaction to what he saw happening. As a catcher, he should be able to pick up on some of those things. Maybe it's not what most catchers would tell the reporters after the game, but it was his honest reaction.
Yeah, and I also think it really, if you kind of step back and look at the statement, it wasn't like the call out that a lot of people are implying that it was. It wasn't really like, it wasn't calling out his like work ethic or anything like that. It was just like, yeah, maybe he kind of lets up just a little bit. And I don't know. I feel like there's probably been greater clubhouse issues and worse things said about teammates.
That's undoubtedly true, I would say. You mentioned the Cubs offense not being quite the juggernaut that you're used to seeing. They scored 3 runs or less in the last 8 games they've played. But for context, I mean, they've scored the 7th most runs in the National League. They've cut down on the strikeouts a little bit. They're now 13th out of 15 National League teams. The Cardinals are significantly worse in that counting stat. But when you look at this offense and who kind of needs to step up, obviously Chris Bryant back from his time on the DL.
Mhm.
kind of the roller coaster of leadoff hitters until you come across the greatest leadoff hitter of all time. What do you make of where this lineup is and sort of where it needs to be going?
Yeah, well, I think they are where we've seen them at different points over the last few years. We've seen an offense that really does kind of struggle and scuffle, and all of a sudden, and this can be like, I point back to like the game 2 or 3 Saturdays ago when they were playing the Braves, and they were down big, and then in the 8th inning they scored 9 runs, and it was in a lot of really goofy ways, and ended up coming back and winning that game. I think they were down like 10-3 or something at one point, or 10-2, something like that. And it's kind of things like that get this team out of its funk. Is just some really they'll have a game where it seems like every guy gets 2 or 3 base hits, and they're just hitting the cover off the ball, scoring a ton of runs, and it seems like that's kind of what gets them out of it as a team. I think the Cubs have also been really lucky to be sitting where they are in the standings and with their record, considering how unproductive Anthony Rizzo has been with the being out with the back injury and coming back and still not really looking right. And it's not even a matter of like, oh, he's hitting the ball hard, it's just not landing. He really just hasn't been hitting the ball that hard either, I guess, until he was the leadoff hitter in the last game, and then he did hit the ball hard. So I think I think that he, because of his role on the team, that the fact that he was there years before some of these other guys, I think he does set the tone. And I think that if Rizzo can get things moving in the right direction, I think it could be contagious with the lineup. And, again, that's kind of how we've seen them get out of these funks in the past, is everybody just kind of like busts out at the same time. And so I'm hoping that happens this weekend. I'm hoping it happens on Friday, but I think that's kind of how we'll see them work their way out of it. And then all of a sudden they'll go on a run where they're scoring 7, 8, 9 runs a game for a week. And then everybody will complain about the pitching. So
they can't ever be happy, right? There's never a reason to be happy. Speaking of hitting leadoff, do you like Anthony Rizzo there? Is that a thing that just sort of happens to take the pressure off everyone else, and then everyone can go back to their normal roles?
I think so. I mean, even when he was like, did it for that stretch last year and just was like ridiculous. Hit like, I think 3 home runs in 4 days or something like that. Madden didn't leave him there. He put him back in the 3 spot, I think. And I think that's, even if Rizzo is batting leadoff in the first game of this series, which I don't think that he will, but even if he is, I don't think Anthony Rizzo is going to bat leadoff for the rest of the season. I think it's his version of a tamed down Joe Madden Zoo Day. I think it's just something to kind of like break things up a little bit, give him a little bit of fun, and I think that it could be something that, I mean, we saw Rizzo get that spot in the order and hit a home run in his first time up, and so maybe it's something that's specifically for Rizzo too, because other than for the previous few days before that, their new 1-2 punch of Almora and Baez have been really productive. They each had 10-game hitting streaks, and both were productive. And so it's not like what they were doing at the top of the order wasn't working, and that's why they did it. I honestly do think it was more for Rizzo, and just to maybe take a little pressure off him and kind of give him a slightly different role.
I want to talk about Javi Baez. A lot of Cardinals fans might not like that I'm going to say this, but I can't not like Javi Baez. He's just a fascinating character to me, and one of those players that makes the game really fun to watch. Maybe not if you're a fan of the opponent so much, but he's just exciting, and there's no way around that. But this year in particular, he's sort of taken it up a notch. He leads the National League with 26 RBI. He's got 9 doubles, 3 triples, 7 home runs. His strikeout rate is down from where it was last year, and he seems to be that spark plug for this team that has had, as you mentioned, its inconsistencies offensively. But what is Javier Baez doing differently this year that's working so well?
That's a really good question. And I feel like everybody is just kind of enjoying Javi being Javi and being exciting and playing better than he ever has in the past. And I don't know, like, I haven't seen any stories of like, as far as like, what is he actually like? Why is he laying off these pitches that he was falling down over swinging at last year? And Javi is a type of guy too that I feel like really goes in streaks. When things are going well, everything goes well with Javi. I mean, he's he was the post game interview. It seemed like, I don't know, 7/8 of the games, in the month of April. He was just on the mic every night. And I think that it was, the Cubs would not be where they are right now if Javi Baez hadn't been playing as well as he had. And really, he anchored the team in the first month of the season. And I'm with you. He's by far my favorite player on the team. The opportunity to interview him when he was in low A with the Peoria Chiefs, and back when they were a Cubs affiliate. And just such a nice guy. And, at the time, a lot of the talk was like, oh, he's so cocky. And a lot of players didn't like him. He had the MLB tattoo on the back of his neck. And everybody, thought he was just full of himself and everything. But he just, and now I feel like even 5 years later, I think a lot of people around baseball have an understanding of like that style of play now and where it's coming from, that it's not coming out of like disrespect for opponents and things like that. It's baseball is a game, and it's fun, and it's meant to be fun, and players should be able to have fun playing it. And so I think that's and I think that Joe Madden kind of gives Javi room to thrive and room to be Javi and just do what he does. And, he's kind of implied that he has the green light whenever he's on the bases. They just kind of leave it up to him and his instincts, because honestly, in my years of being a Cubs fan, I've never seen someone with the baseball instincts that Javi Baez has. I mean, on the base paths alone, it's just incredible to watch him, be able to judge where a throw is going and the angles, and to be able to have like the speed and the I guess flexibility to avoid tags and everything. It's just so much fun to watch. And I just wish there were more Javis in baseball. I wish there were more. I wish every team had a couple players like that.
I sort of took some heat for it the last time I tried to make this comparison, but I'm going to do it anyway because it's my show and I can say what I want. I think that for the Cardinals, there are some ways that Kolten Wong could be that player. And to be clear, I'm not saying that Kolten Wong and Javi Baez profile as having the same skill set, but right. They both have that quality where they can be just this unmatched spark for the team when things are going well. They both have a tendency to be pretty streaky. They both have that sort of personality and that sort of character that lends to the fun of the game. And a lot of times in both cases, it's sort of misconstrued as maybe having an attitude issue. If Kolten Wong had the opportunity to sort of just figure it out and whatever happened, I think he could be that same kind of spark plug. And if he ever got on a streak like Javi has been this year, where he just stops getting out as often as he did in the past, I think he would be that same kind of asset, even if a lot of people stop listening as soon as I say that Javi Baez is like Kolten Wong, which is not really what I'm trying to say.
No, I think you're right. And honestly, I don't know enough about, I know a lot of Cardinals fans, so I hear a lot of stuff about Matheny and the front office and everything. And I'm not sure every team is an organization is going to give players like that the space. I'm not saying the Cardinals wouldn't, but I'm just saying there are some teams. And even, if I look back to managers that the Cubs have had in the past, I can't think other than going back to like maybe Don Zimmer in the 80s. I don't know if, I don't think Lou Piniella, I don't think Dusty Baker, or I don't think, Quaddy and the guys that they've had recently. I'm not sure that they give a player like Javi the freedom to do what he does, understanding that you have to let him do those things when the results aren't there and when it is frustrating, for them to be able to work through those things and then really to be able to like thrive when they have that experience and still have that same personality. So,
yeah, I don't think it's just a Mike Matheny thing, although I do think that Mike Matheny as the manager has something to do with it. But I can't imagine Tony La Russa buying
no,
into the Javi Baez, Colton Wong drama either.
no.
Now, not everybody is having quite the success that Javi Baez is this year. At one point, Ian Happ was supposed to be the leadoff guy. He's struggled. What is sort of the status as far as where he is and what role he plays and how the Cubs try to get him right?
Yeah, and we can't forget that we're kind of expecting all of these young players to be in the same same place that Chris Bryant is or whatever. And I think that we really do have to keep some like realistic expectations that Ian Happ is not the he's not the player profile as some of these other players. However, he started off really poor. He kind of picked things up a little bit. It's kind of slowing back down again. I honestly think with Happ, it's the strikeouts. Last I looked, and I think it's even higher now. This has been a handful of days, but he was around like 41% strikeout rate, and you just can't have that. And I think getting him out of he tore it up in spring training, which is why I think they kind of put them in that leadoff spot, because at the time he was the hottest hitter on the team. And I think pulling him back, moving him down in the order, kind of gives him takes a little pressure off of him. And I think there's just the general baseball second year in the big leagues, pitchers are probably figuring him out a little bit more. And there's all that. But then also Albert Almora has been playing so well in center field and has bbeen so productive offensively and defensively that it's really kind of hard to take Almora off the field, which then leaves you to, if you want Schwarber in there more often than not. So where does Happ fit in? And so right now I think it's just a matter of, and a lot of Cubs fans have called for him to get sent down to AAA. I don't really know if that's what works for every player. And I kind of trust front offices and managers to know what motivates players and what could help and what might not help. But I also think it's important to remember that, especially look at someone like Happ. He has likely never struggled playing the game of baseball in his entire life. And this is the first time that he and someone like Addison Russell, all these guys, like they're having to learn how to work out of funks basically. And I think that we need to, like, when you have a team built of a bunch of young players, that when they struggle, it's likely the first time they have ever struggled. I think we need to like leave them a little bit of space to be able to figure out themselves, like, okay, how do I turn this around? How do I improve it? And like we saw with Schwarber, he tried to do it on his own at the big league level, and it just wasn't really working. And at that point, they had to send him to Iowa. So I don't know if that's the solution to Happ. Again, I trust Theo and Jed and Madden to know what might work. But I think it's important for fans to remember that with all young players, that they have never encountered anything like they are right now. So
yeah, that's I think an overlooked point. These guys were probably the best kid on their team from little league all the way up, and when they're highly touted prospects, they were probably the best player on their minor league teams as well. So when you get to a point where you're suddenly not the best guy on the team just by default, the challenges are going to be different and the adjustments are going to be different. And I think that's probably what makes prospects living up to their expectations such an unpredictability, because you don't know how they're going to adjust when they hit that first speed bump.
Yeah, right.
So let's talk a little bit about this series this weekend, some of the pitching that we're going to see. Game 1 will be Quintana versus Michaelis. Quintana coming off of 7 shutout innings against the Brewers. Michaelis coming off of a month where he had the best strikeout to walk ratio in Major League Baseball. But this will be the first time that he's faced this Cubs lineup. What do you expect out of Quintana and the Cubs as they face a pitcher they've never seen before?
Well, I think with all three pitchers in this series for the Cubs, you don't really know what to expect. They have, as I said earlier, they have been a pitching staff of extremes right now, and they've either looked horrible and given up 6, 7, 8 runs, a start, or they've looked great, like Quintana did his last start. You mentioned shutout innings. He only gave up 2 hits, walked 1, and struck out 7. And that's what I'm hoping for. And we know it's not like that is an extreme case or kind of an outlier with Quintana. He can be very dominant. He can really rack up the strikeouts. And so honestly, I look for these Cubs starting pitchers, except for maybe Chatwood. I'm not sure about Chatwood, but I would expect like Lester and Quintana to kind of start, kind of going to the mean, I guess, of what they've produced so far. And so I honestly do expect Quintana. There's been nothing that I saw in the last start or even the one before, even some of his rougher starts that would make me think that there's a real concern here. So that's really I think over the month of May and starting with this series, I would really like to see the starting pitching kind of like settle into like what you can expect over the course of the season. I guess something a little more stable.
I was at Busch Stadium a couple of weekends ago for an event where we actually had the chance to talk to John Mozeliak about the team. And Miles Mikolas was one of the guys that was brought up. And it was interesting hearing him talk about that acquisition over the offseason because ultimately it really sounded like they felt like their scouting department kind of was pulling one over on Major League Baseball when everyone in the Cardinals fan base wanted him to go out and sign some big name starting pitcher. They were like, no. We got this secret weapon coming back from Japan, and he's going to be really good. Turns out he's been really good. I think better than anyone really expected. And he's been as consistent as I think any of the Cardinals starting pitchers over the starts they've had so far this season. I feel like there's part of me that's waiting for the other shoe to drop a little bit and to see him sort of regress back to what we all expected from Miles Mikolas. But, he's really been able to keep hitters off balance and to just sort of, he has an approach that just never changes. And for a guy coming back to Major League Baseball after time away, that's impressive to see, at least as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, the extent of my knowledge on him is I looked him up earlier today, and I noticed that his MLB.com picture, he looks like he belongs in a rotation with like John Tudor more than Luke Weaver. That's my marginal analysis.
That's fair. That's a pretty accurate description, I think. But speaking of Luke Weaver, he'll go in game 2 facing Chatwood. Nice segue. Appreciate that. Yeah. Weaver did not have a good start against the Cubs in that last series. Again, that was such a strange series with the weather and the off days, and the Cardinals had already shuffled their rotation once to get Waka to start at home, and Weaver just did not look good. It was the first time all season that he looked a little bit overmatched and just couldn't quite get it right. Chatwood is coming off of a strong start against the Brewers as well, but what Cubs pitcher isn't in that series? I feel like between these two and their ground ball tendencies, the defense could be pretty busy in this game.
Yeah, the defense, I'm hoping that the Cubs defense is busy because that means Chatwood is not walking players, which is definitely the biggest area of concern for him right now. He's got a 22% walk rate. Not good. Chatwood has had a real hard time with the strike zone. In his last outing, you mentioned against the Brewers, he started off and he walked the leadoff hitter in the first inning, and I was like, oh no, here we go. But he ended up only walking 2 other pitchers in that game and ended up looking really good. And so I'm hoping that was Chatwood kind of working his way out of it. And I don't know, again, I almost wonder, and somebody kind of brought this to my attention. I hadn't really thought about it. The fact that he came over to the Cubs from the Rockies, and in doing that at Coors, they were kind of wondering, like, did he have to like work around the outside of the zone, right on the edges, trying to induce weak contact and things like that at Coors Field. And so that's kind of his tendency, what he was used to. And there's not a lot of room for error when you do that. And so it was maybe that part of what is, causing him to walk a lot of batters. I don't know if that's the case. But it would be really nice to see him get two outings in a row. I mean, he's your number 5 starter, so you kind of expect him to give up runs. So strangely, even because this is a marathon, not a sprint, as they say, I'm more concerned with in this game watching how he kind of controls the strike zone more than how many runs he gives up, because we know, number 5 starters it can be hittable. And so I think the bigger thing is he throwing strikes and not walking batters. So
in the third game, the series finale, the Cardinals could change things up as far as their starting pitcher. Right now, it looks like it'll be Michael Wacha. Adam Wainwright may be eligible or may be ready, I should say, to come back off of the DL. He would be doing so without a rehab start, which he's done before, but is always a little bit tricky. And, there are some other options. They haven't necessarily confirmed who their starter is. If it's Michael Wacha, he's coming off of a couple of starts where he looks real good for a time or two through the lineup, and then things get a little shaky. So his outings are the ones I think that I'm most concerned about right now as far as the Cardinal starters are concerned. And that's not necessarily new. He's had a couple of seasons with some shoulder issues that tend to be a bit recurring. So worrying about Michael Wacha for me is not necessarily a new thing. But going up against John Lester in that game, especially for the Cubs with Darvish having a bit of an up and down season, how important is Lester to what the Cubs are doing right now?
Yeah, I think he's still really important. I mean, he's technically the number 1 on this team, and I think that the Cubs brought him in a handful of years ago to play this role for an extended period of time. Whether or not his numbers are the best or not, I mean, obviously he's aging, but I think that he's the kind of I feel like the Cubs brought him in to be the pitcher they can count on when they need it. And I feel like right now the Cubs kind of, there's 2 games between now and then, but I feel like the Cubs need a real solid performance from Lester. I mean, just as a baseball fan, as a Cubs fan, and the rivalry with the Cardinals, it's a Sunday night ESPN game, and so those games always kind of matter a little bit more. And we've seen the Cubs really kind of fall on their faces against the Cardinals in these games in the past. And so I would just, but again, it's been so hard to predict individual starts. Like, this is what I can expect from this Cubs pitcher today, because I have no idea. It's either going to be great or terrible. I have no idea which one.
It's funny. I actually had someone, I threw it out there on Twitter and asked people what they wanted to know about this series, what they wanted me to ask you. We've talked about most of those things, but someone said, I want to hear your series predictions. So I feel like I'm going to put both of us on the spot and not necessarily ask you to predict who's going to win or who's going to lose, what starting pitcher is going to do what thing, but what predictions do you have for this series, as unpredictable as Cubs-Cardinals rivalry series can go?
Well, I think the Cubs are going to win the series, I guess 2-1. But I think I think that the Cubs are comfortable in Busch Stadium. I think they've been comfortable there since Game 2 of the 2015 NLDS. Sorry, Cardinals fans. But it seems like ever since that series, the Cubs have felt pretty comfortable in Busch Stadium. I don't feel like they're quite as intimidated as the Cubs had been in the past. And so I think, I almost kind of feel like getting out of Chicago might be a good thing for them right now. I think that just a change of scenery might be good for the offense. And so I guess I don't have any idea what to expect from pitching, really. But I think that for the offense, it wouldn't surprise me if Friday they're still looking terrible and ugly, and then Saturday things kind of come around. So I guess that's kind of my strange prediction.
It's so difficult. I hate trying to make predictions because inevitably it ends up not being. I mean, in the last Cubs-Cardinals series, I would not have predicted that Adam Wainwright would be the winning pitcher over Luke Weaver. I would not have said that. In fact, I'm pretty sure I said, I'm not sure how I feel about Adam Wainwright pitching at Wrigley right now.
And all of the Cubs fans were saying, look at how he's throwing. How are we not hitting this? Well, how is Wainwright just baffling the Cubs right now?
Yeah. So I just as a general rule, I just am very uncomfortable trying to predict things in this series in particular, because it seems like nothing's off the table. But I will say that the Cardinals are they're so interesting to me right now because they're not necessarily playing at a level where I feel like they can go in and beat anyone, but they're also playing at a level where I feel like they kind of have a chance to go in and beat anyone. So there's enough inconsistency. The Cardinals have struck out a lot in the last week. A lot of scoreless innings. Yesterday, in Wednesday's game, the White Sox faced the minimum through the first 5 innings. So I would say I expect that to start to look better. I think Matt Carpenter is probably on a bit of an upswing, which is not necessarily the boldest prediction of all times, but I think that he'll start to look better. He seems to be in a more comfortable place than he's been all season, which ironically happened because he looked at some numbers that said, hey, you're actually really not that bad. You're just a little bit unlucky. So the mental block may be gone for Matt Carpenter. So I think he'll look good in the series. I think Luke Weaver will be better than he was against the Cubs the last time out. That was just such a weird game all around, and I think he's better than that. So I think Luke Weaver will look stronger. And I don't think that Mike Matheny will try to use Greg Holland as the closer anytime in this series. So that's that's as far as I'm willing to go as far as bold predictions in this series.
I'll be honest. I wouldn't be shocked with a Cubs sweep. I wouldn't be shocked with a Cardinals sweep. I have no idea what to expect this series, and I'm kind of hoping, just from a Cubs fan perspective, is that the Cubs could potentially kind of use this to. We've seen the Cubs kind of like to bookend. They go from great, terrible offense to all of a sudden a great offense. And I feel like that kind of, like I said earlier, that clicks and it happens in a moment. And I kind of feel like this is their chance to do that. I think, it being the Cardinals, it being, an NL Central team. And so I kind of am, secretly expecting the Cubs offense to really use this series to turn things around. And I haven't even looked to see what the weather is, but it's hot here. So I
can't be worse than it was 2 weeks ago.
No, I was listening to the Cubs radio broadcast a couple days ago, it was yesterday. And they were saying that they've never seen a home series where at the beginning of it was 30 in the 30s. And then at the end, it's in the mid 80s and hot and humid and, polar extremes, I guess. But we don't have to worry about cold, weather so cold that you can't get a good grip on the ball, and batters, flinching every time they swing, anticipation of sore hands and all that.
Yeah, and on the flip side, I guess just as a Cardinals fan, you mentioned how comfortable the Cubs have been at Busch Stadium the last couple of seasons. I would like to see them look a little uncomfortable at Busch Stadium for the first time in a couple of seasons, because you're right, they have sort of come into Busch Stadium and just taken charge. And I think the Cardinals are to me, it feels like the Cardinals are right on the verge of sort of gaining back a little bit of that momentum that allows them to sort of say, hey, this is our home turf, and we're going to do everything we can to protect it. They seem to be coming together and gelling a little bit more than they have in the last 2 or 3 years combined. So that's a good sign, but I would like to see that translate on the field more than just the guys goofing around in the clubhouse and having a good time. So that's maybe not a prediction, but what I would like to see on the Cardinals side of this series this weekend. But we'll see. Like you mentioned, nothing would surprise me at this point with these two teams. And, that's, I guess, why we've talked about it for half an hour, because we have nothing else to do than to... Right, it's Cubs Cardinals. And predictable or not, we can't help but talk about it. So thank you for joining me again, and we'll see what happens this weekend.
All right.
After Wednesday's win over the White Sox, some Cardinals players voiced their sense that this is one of the most capable teams they've ever played on. Now, I know the idea that clubhouse chemistry translates to actual wins is largely unproven, but there is a real point to make here. The Cardinals have not been in a good place on the field or off for the last couple of seasons. Clicks, tiffs, miscommunication, lack of talent. It's all factored in when those of us on the outside looking in at the product on the field conclude that something was pretty obviously off. While I think that Matt Carpenter and Yadier Molina tend to always say their team is good, and who doesn't, except maybe Wilson Contreras, it's a joke. Leave it alone. That's not the same kind of talk that we've heard from this clubhouse for the last couple of years. I mean, this team does feel different, even if they're not steamrolling opponents left and right. But talk is one thing. It's something else to back it up, and that is exactly what they'll have to do against the Cubs if they want anyone to take those comments seriously. Thanks again to Corey Finneran for joining me today, and best of luck with those predictions. What are your series predictions? Let me know in the comments below or on Twitter, but whatever you do, make sure that you subscribe so that you don't miss the next episode. Until then, I'm Tara Wellman.